Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, we're jumping straight into a really foundational idea today, drawn from the sources you shared. You hear it a lot in conversation, right? This idea of being blessed, you know, getting good stuff, success, things flowing to you. But the material we've got here really challenges that. It suggests, well, maybe just receiving is only the start. It pushes us towards something more active.
Yeah.
Becoming a blessing, imparting it. So our mission today is to unpack this idea that sources insist there's this necessary, sometimes pretty tough process involved, moving from just being blessed to actively being the blessing for others. The big question is just being blessed actually enough?
Yeah, and what's really interesting right off the bat is how the sources talk about this. It's not presented as like a lucky break or something that just happens. They frame it very clearly as a process, a defined path, almost structured. You don't just sort of stumble into a major role. You have to be, well, formed for it.
Formed, right.
And that formation, according to the core findings here, it's rarely smooth sailing. It's often difficult, unpredictable.
That's the paradox, isn't it? Why the difficulty?
Well, the sources are pretty explicit. They suggest that the difficult path isn't some kind of detour or mistake. It's actually part of the plan.
Okay, so the hardship is the plan. How does that work?
It seems the idea is that this adversity, this difficult experience, it's what actually shapes the person. It builds the character, the resilience, the stuff you absolutely need to eventually deliver that, significant positive impact.
So it's not just an unfortunate side effect. It's essential, like a requirement?
Exactly. Almost a non-negotiable prerequisite. Think of it like forging metal. You need the heat, you need the pressure, the hammering to create something strong and useful.
That makes sense.
Adversity seems to do two things here. First, it kind of filters people out, those just looking for the easy win. Second, it forces you to develop skills you just wouldn't learn if everything was comfortable. Things like foresight, empathy, resourcefulness. You get those in the tough times.
Okay, so let's ground this. The main case study the material uses is Joseph. His story is, wow, quite the roller coaster. It's a long one, detailed in the early books. Goes from being the favorite son, kind of spoiled maybe, to suddenly being betrayed, sold by his own brothers. Slavery. Then falsely accused, thrown into prison.
Right. And we need to remember the time scale here. This wasn't just a bad week. We're talking years of hardship, isolation.
Years, yeah. But then the sources point us to that moment, much later, when he's risen to power in Egypt, second in command, and he confronts his brothers during that famine.
That's the pivotal moment, isn't it? Genesis 50.20, specifically. He tells them essentially, you meant this for evil.
But God meant it for good.
Exactly. He sees the whole difficult journey as being used strategically to put him in the right place at the right time. He became the source of survival, the blessing not just for his family, but for the whole region, even for the ones who hurt him.
So his suffering was actually positioning him.
That's the argument. It highlights the prerequisite idea again. His time managing things in Potiphar's house, even his time organizing things in prison. That was like his training ground.
His executive training, as you put it before.
Right. He had to prove he could handle responsibility, sure, but maybe more importantly, he had to show he could maintain his integrity, his character, when he had no support, when things were unfair, under pressure.
And that proved he could be trusted with the palace.
Exactly. Trusted not just with the power, but with the responsibility to use that power to bless others. The pattern seems really clear in his story, that deep personal formation comes before the big public role.
Okay, so this pattern formation through hardship, before the big impact.
Yeah.
You're saying it's not just Joseph. The sources show this elsewhere.
Absolutely. It feels like a red thread, as you called it, running through several key figures. It suggests this intense preparation phase isn't accidental. It's, well, necessary for anyone stepping into a role of major positive influence.
Okay, like who else?
Well, think about Esther. Her story starts with loss. She's an orphan, raised by her cousin in a foreign land. That initial isolation, that vulnerability.
That's her formation.
It seems so. That specific background placed her perfectly culturally and politically for what came next, becoming queen.
But just being queen wasn't the end goal.
Not at all.
Yeah.
The position was the platform, the tool, the real test. The moment she stepped into being the blessing was when she had to risk everything. Her status, her life, everything.
For her people. For such a time as this.
Precisely. She had to leverage that unexpected influence born from her difficult beginnings to save her nation. Her background gave her perspective others in the palace lacked.
Okay, Esther, who else follows this pattern?
David is another classic example. He starts out completely overlooked. Even his own father doesn't really rate him when Samuel comes looking for a king.
Right, he's out with the sheep.
Exactly. His school, his formation wasn't some fancy academy. It was the pasture. Lonely work, dangerous too, protecting sheep from lions, bears. That's where he learned courage, resourcefulness, dependence on something bigger than himself.
But his trials didn't stop there, did they?
Not by a long shot. After that initial moment of fame, Goliath, he spends years as a fugitive, hunted by Saul, living rough in the wilderness, leading this band of, well, misfits, really.
So more hardship, what did that teach him?
Seems like it taught him empathy, how to lead people who were also on the margins, patience, strategy under pressure. The sources suggest the great king he eventually became was forged in that wilderness. It taught him humility, which is pretty crucial if you're going to wield power well.
Okay, Joseph, Esther, David, any others?
Peter comes to mind as well. Starts as just a regular fisherman. Enthusiastic, definitely, but also impulsive. And crucially, he experiences a really profound, very public failure.
Denying Jesus.
Right. He wasn't exactly a pillar of strength from the get-go.
So how does failure fit into this formation idea? How did that prepare him?
Well, the sources show him being restored after that failure. He doesn't stay broken. And after that process, that continued formation, then he delivers these incredibly powerful speeches, the ones that kicked off the early church movement described in Acts.
Okay. So the failure wasn't the end, it was part of the process.
That seems to be the key insight here. His failure wasn't just wiped away, it became part of who he was. Having been broken, having failed so publicly, and then being restored, it gave him a unique kind of authority, a deep empathy.
He wasn't speaking from perfection.
Exactly. He was speaking from restoration, from experience. That whole journey, the initial enthusiasm, the failure, the testing, the perseverance, and importantly, his willingness to be restored and re-engage. That's what enabled him to become such a powerful channel of blessing for so many.
So putting it all together, these stories, they consistently show this need for testing, for sticking it out. And what was the phrase you used?
A conscious willingness of heart, a willingness to be shaped, even when it's painful. That seems crucial for making that transition into being a source of blessing.
Okay, this is where, for me, the analysis gets really interesting, almost counterintuitive. The sources don't just say, oh, they struggled, but it worked out. They actually seem to highlight the initial weaknesses as being vital. Esther being an orphan, David being underestimated, Peter failing. The sources suggest these weren't just obstacles to overcome, they were somehow integral to the whole process.
Yes, that's a really powerful point they make. It's like those initial deficiencies, as you put it, weren't bugs in the system. They were features.
Features, how so?
The idea seems to be that if they'd started out perfect, if Joseph hadn't been flawed, if David was the obvious heir, if Peter had never faltered, maybe they wouldn't have developed the depth, the humility, the relatability needed for their ultimate roles.
So the imperfection was necessary.
There's this powerful analogy used in the sources. It suggests that their weaknesses, their struggles, their cracks were actually what allowed the light, the blessing, to get in first and then to flow out to others.
Like a vessel needs an opening to pour something out.
Kind of. If it's perfectly sealed, nothing can get through. Their suffering, their imperfections made them relatable. It created humility. When they eventually stood in those places of influence, the message wasn't, look how amazing I am. It was more like, look what this process can do, even through someone flawed like me.
The blessing flows through the person, using the very parts that were once weak.
But have been shaped into strengths through that process.
Yeah.
The purpose finds its perfection through their acknowledged imperfection.
Okay, let's step back. What does all this mean for you listening? The distinction feels really important. Being blessed, that's often a gift, right? Grace, something we receive. But becoming a blessing. The sources present that as something different, a higher calling, maybe, and one that demands we actually engage with this difficult, often uncomfortable process.
It's not passive. It requires participation.
Right. And the sources make this comparison that, frankly, I found kind of stinging. It argues that lots of people want the end result. They want Joseph's influence, David's crown, the big impact.
The palace, the status.
Exactly. But very few are actually willing to sign up for the journey to get there. They don't want the preparation, the suffering, the isolation.
They want the palace, but not the prison. They want the crown, but not the wilderness years chasing sheep or running from enemies. They want Peter's Pentecost sermon, but not his earlier denial.
Yeah. That's the uncomfortable truth it lays out.
And that leads directly to the core question the material seems to pose to each person. The real self-reflection point. Are you content just receiving, just being a recipient of blessing? Or Is there a deeper willingness, a willingness in your heart to actually embrace the process, the discomfort, the formation required to become a channel, a source of blessing for others?
And that willingness,
Yeah,
that seems to be the deciding factor.
according to these sources, yes. That willingness of heart to enter the difficulty, trusting it has a purpose, seems to be the key that unlocks that larger, more impactful role.
Okay, so we've seen the necessity of the process. We've seen that integrity during the suffering is key. And this crucial idea of a willingness to step into the hard parts, the wilderness, the prison,
Mhm.
whatever form it takes, it seems clear. Enduring the preparation, however painful, is presented as the cost of eventually becoming a source of widespread blessing.
Mm-hmm. Formation before function.
Right. So let's leave everyone with this final thought to chew on. If you genuinely feel that pull, that desire to move beyond just receiving, to really start channeling good to others in a significant way, what's the smallest thing you could do? The smallest actionable step, or maybe just a shift in attitude that you could implement, like today. Something to start walking that necessary path, even if it feels tiny right now.
It doesn't have to be dramatic. It could be about how you handle a current difficulty, choosing humility instead of defensiveness, looking for ways to be resourceful instead of just complaining.
What does your small prison or wilderness look like right now? And maybe more importantly, how are you choosing to act to maintain your integrity within it? That might be the first step on that path.